Hi everybody, I'm John Fairless from the Lectionary Lab, here with your lectionary lesson for June the 21st, 2015. We're gathering our thoughts today under the title, Who is this? It's actually a question that is asked in both of our scripture texts for today. Our Hebrew scripture reading, which comes from Job chapter 38, it's actually God who asks the question. When Job stands in front of him, God says, "Who is this that comes to me with these questions?" In our gospel reading today from Mark chapter 4, the disciples are left kind of scratching their heads and asking the question, "Who is this?" after they have an encounter alongside Jesus in the midst of a storm on the Sea of Galilee. Both of these stories are going to come together today as we realize our focal point that, sometimes we may need to take a step back and simply be awed by God. I'm glad you've joined us for the study today. Let's get on to our first scripture. Well, that's the question for today. Who is this? We'll see it, as I mentioned, in Job 38 and also in Mark chapter 4. Here's a look at Job, by the way, at least as envisioned and portrayed by Léon Bonnat. Kind of evokes a little bit of pity. Now, we're going to talk about that. What do you think of when you hear the story of Job? Job certainly wasn't always pitiful, and to be quite honest, he wasn't always awed by God. Well, let's hear this part of the story of Job for today. Job 38, beginning in verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed bounds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stopped. As we think about the background to this story, we might do well to ask ourselves the question, what's the first thing we usually think about whenever we consider the story of Job? For most of us, we think, he's the guy who had to learn patience. There was lots of trouble, tons of questions, a lot of things Job had to endure. It is a book about suffering, though the questions Job asks may not deal with suffering in quite the way that we expect. In many ways, this story of Job is to illustrate the way that suffering in our world does not happen. Sometimes there's just no apparent rhyme or reason for the suffering. In Job's time, the assumption was that good people enjoy good things, and that if bad things are happening to you, you must have done something bad. We think that way these days too. In the book, Job is called blameless and upright. Any church in their right mind would be thrilled to have Job as a member. He was faithful in his attendance, a generous giver, always willing to volunteer. They don't come any better than Job, and yet Job suffers devastating losses. He loses his business, his home, his children. Practically anyone would be tempted to ask, "Why me, Lord?" But Job never does. Now, he does spend a good deal of time telling God how he feels, and he evokes some of the most honest language in all of Scripture when addressing the Almighty, even to the point of telling God when he's really ticked off, which is what sets up our passage for today. After Job and all of his friends, who are quoted at length in these previous chapters, after they've had their say, God steps to the podium and asks a few questions of God's own. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? That's a pretty strong opener. Essentially, just who do you think you are, son? speaking of things that you don't really understand. From there, God uses a series of questions to lay out for Job and for us just exactly what it is that's involved in being God. Laying the earth's foundations, measuring the skies, creating and sustaining stars and the universe, placing a boundary on the oceans. It's all pretty impressive. All in all, this speech by God, which continues for 2 more chapters, serves to give Job a whole new perspective. In the end, Job says, I lay my hand on my mouth. I will speak no more. Perhaps we would do well to follow the example of Job, to step back a bit and consider just exactly who it is we are speaking to when we worship and pray. Let's hear the text from the Gospel in Mark chapter 4. We'll begin in verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, Let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? As we read this gospel story, Mark writes with a very concise, almost clipped style that moves the action forward without a lot of chatter. The setup for our story is simple. Jesus and his disciples have been working hard. They could really use a break. It was difficult for Jesus to get closing time in front of the people. They kept coming to him. The needs were ever present. So they used the boats in this case in an attempt to put some space between themselves and the crowds. Now Jesus is tired, and he takes advantage of the break by catching a nap in the rear of the boat. Of course, as fate would have it, a storm blows up and turns the situation pretty serious. You can see we've got a picture of a boat here. These are fishermen on the Sea of Galilee today. The boats are about the same size as they were in Jesus' day. To lap over the side of the boat, the waves were probably somewhere in the maybe 4 feet, maybe as big as 6 feet. If you've ever been in the water in a small craft, you know that it can turn your tummy in a hurry. Things get pretty shaky. Well, Jesus snoozes on, and the disciples get a little frantic, a little bit perturbed. And when they wake Jesus up, they accuse him of not caring about their fate. Jesus promptly admonishes the wind and the sea, which both subsequently settle down. Perhaps Jesus is a little ill himself. I mean, which one of us really likes being waked up out of a deep sleep, especially when you're really, really tired? And so Jesus offers a not-so-gentle rebuke to his followers. What's wrong with you people? Why should you be afraid? Where's the faith I've been trying to teach you to have in God? Like our passage from Job, the response of the disciples is one of awe and wonder, with maybe just a touch of sheepishness on the side. Now it's their turn to ask the question of the day, who is this? Do we ever get so used to the mundane business of coming to church, reading the text, saying the prayers, singing the songs, that we kind of forget who it is we're dealing with here? Hopefully, we don't have to wait for a storm to blow into our lives, tempting us to doubt God's care for us, before we stop and realize the awesomeness of Jesus in our midst. It is a gift not to be valued lightly. Well, as we wrap up our consideration of the scripture text for today, there are some pretty interesting questions for discussion. I hope you're having the time to do that. Not only the questions I'm going to suggest, but those that you raise yourself and your own considerations of this text. It might be a good time to stop and think, how long has it been since I stopped and took a good look at the world around? Have you taken the time to wonder how something as simple as a tree growing is in and of itself pretty miraculous? What about those questions that God asked Job? How is the earth supported in space? What about the mysteries that are being revealed to us through modern technology like the Hubble Space Telescope? Throw up a little picture here. It doesn't look all that impressive on the screen maybe, but it kind of blows my mind. That's an actual shot as you look out across the universe. How did all those stars and galaxies get out there? If you've never done it or you haven't done it in a while, you might want to go to the website hubblesite.org. There are some absolutely stunning things that in just these past few years we've been able to see about our universe. Now think about this gospel story. Why is it that Jesus asked the disciples if they have no faith? By asking them to assess their fear, what do you think it is that Jesus hopes they will understand? And finally, if you had to describe God and also describe Jesus in just one sentence, one for each of them, what would you say? How do we even begin to put into words who God is, who Jesus is for us? Well, that was a lot of fun for me. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in today. Our lesson has been prepared by Dr. John Fairless, and so all of the opinions represented, I guess they're his own, and he'll have to take responsibility for them. Our scriptures were provided from the New Revised Standard Version and used by permission. Thanks a lot. The text selections are from the Revised Common Lectionary. Those are available on the Vanderbilt University website. This really cool theme music is performed by the 126ers and is taken from the YouTube audio library. And I just need to tell you that this production is copyright by the Lectionary Lab and really ought to be used only for its intended purposes. I hope you all have a great week this week. And again, thanks. We'll see you next time.